As modern warfare reaches new levels of ferocity, this symbol no longer guarantees safety for its volunteers.
The Red Cross flag gives no more protection than any other piece of material would.
Our task is much more dangerous, much more difficult now than it used to be when we started.
John Simpson investigates the changing role of the Red Cross. Crossing the Lines, Wednesday, 9:30 on BBC Two.
This is BBC Two. Frightening arguments about Gulf War syndrome and the future of chemical weapons now in Horizon. And you may find some scenes in this programme distressing.
The Gulf War illnesses, sometimes called the Gulf War syndrome, is actually part of a much larger thing that I call Pentagon syndrome.
The generals don't want to admit that they may have made a mistake that may have cost tens of thousands of soldiers their health and, in many cases, their lives.
I think this is an enormous experiment. I'm just appalled at the way it was actually done.
Did Allied attempts to shield our troops from Saddam's nightmare weapons backfire? Have we bungled our chemical and biological defense? In 1990, Saddam Hussein threatened the mother of all battles. Over 700,000 Allied troops poured into the Gulf. It was one of the heaviest aerial campaigns in military history. Over 200,000 Iraqis died.
There was an awful lot of dead bodies, burned, scattered round, as if they were bits of dolls that had been dismembered, were arms and legs and things. Some of them, they looked as though they were asleep, but there was lots of them, and the smell was really something else.
You go, oh my God, you know, is this going to be it? Saddam was known to have used chemical and biological warfare on his own people. I've never been as scared in my life as that.
It was all over in 7 weeks. But for many veterans, the celebrations were short-lived.
It's as if your legs are broken and you can't walk on them. You want to, everything is saying you have to do it, but you can't.
I'll start swimming in my head and I can't do anything. I mean, you can't walk, you can't brush your teeth, you really can't do anything.
It's like someone's taken the batteries out of a toy. There's just no energy.
You feel that you're going to fall over. Basically, you're going to collapse. So basically, you shuffle around on your bottom. Come downstairs on your bottom. And if you've got to do that, then you've got to sleep downstairs. Psychologically, it just destroys you. And you do think of taking your own life. Because life is just so meaningless because you can't do anything that you used to do before.
I went to my doctor when I was feeling ill. One of the things he did was to write to the Ministry of Defence and ask them for my medical records. He wrote, and all he got was a photocopy of the cover. So I wrote myself. All I received was a photocopy of the cover, along with a letter saying that there was nothing else relevant or disclosable to my illness in the Gulf.
In the bleak aftermath of war, there was no easy way to find out what harmed them. But this was one of the most toxic wars this century. There was no shortage of suspects. Toxic fumes from burning oil wells, radiation sickness from exploded uranium shells, exposure to deadly nerve agents and biological weapons, the vaccines, pills, and pesticides given to protect against them. Or had they imagined the whole thing due to stress? The official response was dismissive.
The government wishes to be entirely open about what happened during the Gulf conflict, and I wish to stress, Madam Speaker, that we have nothing to hide, and indeed absolutely no reason to do so.
We cannot accept that there is any connection between their illness and their service in the Gulf.
But it is true that people who have served in the Gulf are now ill, but there is no common link to any of those illnesses that can be associated to a syndrome which could be called a Gulf War syndrome.
In America, preliminary studies found no evidence for a Gulf War syndrome. But the number of veterans reporting sickness soared to 70,000.
Please drop bombs for personnel 500 meters due north of my location. This is danger close. Rupture that. That's fine, we got bombs away now.
And fallout from the Gulf War was only just beginning. There appeared to be an unseen target which nobody expected.
When I first saw my son, I only got to see him for a short while. I just got a glimpse of his face, but he was missing his eye and his ear. We just couldn't cope with it. I mean, it was, we tried to cope with it the best we could. We asked questions of the doctors about why and what else, but it seemed like every 5 minutes another doctor would walk in and say, we found this wrong, we found this wrong. Your child may not have brain function. There's no eye completely, he'll be blind on that side. And, you know, then we don't know about the jaw. And then the stomach and the lungs are connected. You know, it just was going on. It seemed like it was never ending. The doctors came back with, what kind of drugs are you taking? And these are basically problems that are caused by drugs. And I said, I'm not taking drugs. I said, I went to the Gulf War and I got the drugs that y'all gave us and was in the chemical areas. And the whole room went dead quiet. Then they didn't want to talk about anything.
Cedric is now 6.
Hey. Hi. Oh, God.
We cried. When it's your child, I mean, you just don't know what to do. You accept it, you love them.
Okay.
Out of all of this, Cedric's gone through so much.
What's his name? He doesn't have one.
He came home from school one day. He wears a glass eye, and he had his eye had come out and he'd put it in his pocket. And I was sitting at the table and he came up and he put the eye on the table. And he looked up at me and he said, Dad, can I have one of your eyes? And he pushed his eye over at me. And I was trying to prepare myself all my life for a question like this, and he just took me off guard and hit me, and it was very, very difficult to answer, and it breaks your heart, because you know in a second if you could do it, you'd give him yours, but you can't. So it's hard.
What do you think? All right.
Initial studies backed the official line that service in the Gulf did not cause birth defects. But pressure from the veterans began to challenge the military's view of a clean war. Accusations began to fly. Most frightening was the veterans' claim that they were bombed with nerve gas.
We were scuddied quite regularly, which were quite terrifying at first because you thought, oh God, am I going to live through this? And we used to get quite a lot of black alerts, which was chemical or suspected chemical.
Somebody came, woke us up, and they said, we have incoming Scud type things, so many minutes. You pull your mask on, and you're thinking, all right, okay, I'm okay, you know, I got it on. You know, this is really what's going through your mind.
Alarms fired repeatedly. It was known Saddam Hussein had a vast armory of nerve agents such as sarin and tarbon. So were the troops exposed to a nerve gas attack? Chemical pathologist Alistair Hay has studied the nerve gases.
The nerve gases are based on a family of chemicals called organophosphates. The way in which the nerve agents work is basically by blocking an essential enzyme in the nervous system.
This rabbit is getting a lethal dose of a nerve gas. The effects will be the same in man.
So muscles are unable to contract and relax, and they stay in a position of almost permanent spasm. And this means that individuals are not able to breathe, for example.
There is vomiting, urination, and diarrhea.
Everywhere that nerves attach to muscles, you will have a permanent effect of spasm.
Breathing is paralyzed, and death follows.
You're literally talking about a drop of chemical that would be required to kill you.
Saddam Hussein had used them before. So did he use them in the Gulf?
I don't believe that the troops were exposed to chemical warfare agents used as weapons of war. There's no evidence that the soldiers had significant symptoms on the battlefield to indicate that they'd been exposed to nerve gas or mustard gas. There would have been all sorts of casualties, people collapsing, people dying.
But there was still the unexplained mystery of what triggered the alarms. The troops say they were told this was due to unburned jet fuel, sonic booms, diesel, even cigarette smoke. But not everyone believes that these were all false alarms. Former Secret Service agent James Toot.
I was formally asked to investigate the U.S.'s role in arming Iraq. As we were looking and uncovering information about that, I was also asked to look at the possible health effects of destroying those weapons during our bombing raids. So I had the highest security clearances in the United States government. I should have had access to any information.
He was concerned the generals may have exposed their own troops to low levels of nerve gas by bombing Iraqi chemical weapons factories.
Splash. That was an excellent splash.
When we bombed those facilities, immediately thereafter, there was widespread reporting and detection of chemical agents throughout the theater of operations. The detectors of the French, the Czechs, the United States, and Great Britain were all saying that these chemicals were present. Animals were dying in the desert. Everything was saying that we should be concerned. The soldiers were being told not to be concerned.
Toot's own analysis of weather and satellite data, combined with veterans' reports, suggested plumes of very dilute nerve gas had drifted over thousands of troops.
The position of the Department of Defense during that period of time was that there was no evidence of any detection, no evidence of any exposure, no evidence of any animals dying in the desert, no classified material indicating any detections of or exposures to these compounds, that there was nothing, and that this was a hypothesis that was, as we say, out in left field, that there was no basis for it in fact.
He wanted the chemical logs, the official record of chemical exposure.
We requested those logs, and within 30 days I received a response from the Office of the General Counsel of the Department of Defense that the Central Command could not identify any such thing as a log. And we knew these things existed, and we were again being met by Pentagon denials. There were, in fact, 2 copies of these logs. One down in Florida at CENTCOM headquarters, the second up in Aberdeen, Maryland at the Institute for Chemical Defense. These logs were brought back from the Gulf. They existed both in hard copy and on disk. The Pentagon explanation that these logs disappeared from 2 locations simultaneously in secure environments is just unbelievable. It's not credible. They were the history of this issue as it related to this war. They now claim that sometime after we started our investigation, they disappeared.
Well, we misplaced a lot of things, as happens after any war. There seems to be no pattern in anything that was misplaced, and certainly when we came home, we destroyed enormous amounts of data, and everybody that was with one of the units during the end of the conflict or after the conflict was over will tell you about burning lots of their records. They just didn't want to carry them home.
Do you seriously expect us to believe that chemical logs could disappear from 2 secure locations in Florida and Maryland, stored in both hard copy and disk?
Oh, sure.
How do you account for this?
I have no idea.
Only 36 of the estimated 200 pages of logs remain. These do show chemical detections. Now there's a criminal investigation into what happened to the rest of the files. And finally, the Pentagon admitted that destroying an arms dump at Kamsia may have led to exposures.
Since we did our report, the Pentagon in July of 1997 released a report that revealed that from a single facility, nearly 100,000 soldiers may have been exposed to low levels of the nerve agent sarin.
It is possible. It's been stated that perhaps up to as many as 100,000 have been exposed to low-level chemical agents, and that's on the basis of the explosion, the destruction of presumed chemical weapons that took place at Kemisea, and that is still being worked, and I don't know the status of it right now, but possibly so.
Why did it take the Pentagon 5 years to admit this?
I think it took the Pentagon 5 years to find it out, not to admit it. As soon as we found it out, as soon as the Pentagon found it out, it was instantly admitted to. I think most would now acknowledge, and certainly the Presidential Advisory Committee said, that certainly this was a failure, but an inadvertent one, to figure out and acknowledge information that we had. We really didn't know we had it.
The official position on nerve gas had now shifted. The military accepted troops were exposed, but argued the levels were too low to cause harm. But in fact, tests on low-level nerve gas had been carried out at Britain's Chemical and Biological Defense Establishment at Porton Down years ago.
Yeah, the visit to Porton Down at the time seemed, I think as we used to call it, a good skive.
The official view was that these experiments caused no long-term harm. The volunteers themselves have a different story.
They told us they would give us a shilling a day per experiment and a 48-hour pass at the end of it. So that sounded very nice, you know. So I volunteered for it.
Our section was going to go into a gas chamber, but what we were going into, we weren't told.
The great danger of nerve gas over all previous war gases is its speed of action.
The rabbits that were put in these little baskets and wheeled in with us into the gas chamber. Behind us, they were at the back.
It kills very quickly.
And a chap came in with us and he stood behind us. Now he wore a gas mask.
And to an onlooker, the appearance of a casualty prior to death can be most unpleasant.
There was about an inch of nerve gas in that needle. And he injected that into the atomizer, which just sprays out into the room where you're standing. And we're all standing looking out, and they're all sitting looking in. But when we turned round, all the rabbits were dead. So they couldn't have stood the amount that had been given.
Our lungs were constricted and they were very painful. And we were quite blinded by the light. And, you know, we laid on this grass bank, gasping for breath.
It's worrying because you think, well, if it's killed the rabbits, then what's it done to me?
All our eyes were, the pupils had come down to pinpricks and we could hardly see. Since I went to Porton Down, I've had years of tight chest and pain.
I've had breathlessness ever since that first time at Porton Down. You feel dizzy, sick, your heart's beating like the clappers, you know, and it's really, really bad.
Hundreds of human volunteers went through the gas chambers before Porton Down switched to testing models. The long-term effects of nerve gas on volunteers have never been studied, and they are prevented by law from pursuing a claim against the government.
Times change, science moves on, and now, looking back and taking into account some of the events you've just mentioned, we will be looking at the long-term effects of low doses of sarin.
So are you accepting that those Porton Down volunteers may indeed have suffered as a result of their exposures here?
I have no evidence to show that.
But you haven't studied it?
Correct.
The appearance of a casualty prior to death can be most unpleasant. Nerve gas may be used against us in either the
Oh,
liquid
good
or
grief.
the vapor
Justice
form.
from Porton Down. I'm disgusted with the higher-ups, if you like. The Gulf War blokes are suffering the same as what we're suffering. So if there's no link, how does it happen?
So could very low-level sarin have affected the troops? Recently, a new test was developed which would reveal if veterans had tiny amounts of nerve gas in their blood. But veterans have not been able to obtain their own blood samples.
When we asked for those blood samples, the Ministry of Defence said that their blood isn't around anymore. We asked again, and they then admitted, oh yes, we have some in a freezer, but we aren't sort of sure what it is.
Was this the best that could be done after 7 years?
The best I can offer them is that we are being as open and as thorough as we possibly can be with all aspects of Gulf veterans' illnesses and their cases, and that we are going through every piece of information we have and every piece of material we have, including these samples that are in the freezers now, and trying to work out which sample is which, and looking at the coding and the nomenclature on the bottles, and trying to work out what then we can do with it thereafter. But the intention is to be as full as possible in releasing all information that we can to the Gulf veterans and their representatives.
And to veterans who feel then that as a result of what's happened to the blood that there's been a cover-up, what would you say?
Obviously there's been no cover-up, because if there had been a cover-up I would probably be sitting here denying the existence of blood samples.
So the question of whether the Gulf veterans are suffering from exposure to low-level nerve gas remains unresolved, as for the Porton Down volunteers. But there was another suspect. Nerve agent pre-treatment tablets, given in the belief they would protect against nerve gas.
I first got the pills in Germany. They dispensed them to everybody. I asked a gentleman what they were, and he said it was a secret weapon that the Army had to protect us against chemical agents, and basically that's all we were told. And I remember after just a couple doses, I didn't feel good.
I just felt so ill all of a sudden. You know, I had a very, very severe headache. I was having difficulty concentrating, and of course I felt, you know, really, really sick.
There were decades of research to find antidotes to nerve gas.
In the course of some of these experiments, the British government researchers developed an agent called pyridostigmine bromide.
Like nerve gas, this blocks a key enzyme in the nervous system, but just temporarily, in theory protecting against the effects of nerve gas to make muscles spasm.
And of course, this blockade only lasted as long as individuals were taking tablets of pyridostigmine bromide. Once they stopped taking the tablets, the enzyme would return to normal function and it would be available for nerve transmission.
But some question the drug's safety record. Thomas Teat was involved in early studies at the University of Maryland.
Well, PB, or pyridostigmine bromide, the main ingredient in the NAPS pills, the nerve agent pills, has a tremendous record in terms of the toxic record. Study after study was published prior to the Gulf War showing that PB has toxic effects on bone development, on muscle cells, on nerve cells. I have studies from at least a dozen Pentagon laboratories that found these things. It should never have been used.
Think of the question that you would ask had the Iraqis used a nerve agent which we had a pre-treatment to protect against, and because of fears that it would cause some other minor problems, we didn't use it. I would have lost my job, and I should have been shot.
But Army studies suggest PB may not work against sarin, Saddam's chief nerve gas. Worse still, the latest research in mice shows that under stressful conditions, it can enter the brain, potentially causing brain damage.
Giving PB in the Gulf War was the largest clinical experiment ever done. Just before the Gulf War began, the Department of Defense essentially pressured the Food and Drug Administration to do something that has never been done before or since, and that is allowing the Department of Defense a waiver of obtaining informed consent from the 500,000 soldiers that were forced against their will to enter a clinical experiment.
Wasn't an experimental agent, wasn't used experimentally. It was used for very sound scientific reasons to protect soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marine lives, to protect their lives. The very, very small risks that were taken with this in balance to the potential benefit clearly led to the decision that it should be given.
I think it's still an open question as to whether the NAPS tablets could have harmed the vets. The way the NAPS tablets were used in the Gulf, they were used in situations which were quite different to tests in volunteers where the dosages were regulated and where the conditions were controlled and there was no stress. The situation in the Gulf was quite different, and I think we just have no answers at all as to whether the prescription of NAPS in the Gulf caused problems for the vets, and we need to know that.
So it's still unknown whether NAPS tablets caused harm, and new Porton-Down studies are underway. In the latest Gulf crisis, the tablets were not given to troops. And a storm was brewing over another revelation. This time, the clues emerged from an unexpected direction.
In the early 90s, 3 patients were referred to me by my colleagues who had a bizarre and very particular neurological problem. We've investigated them, and the only common thing we found between them is that these were farmers using organophosphate compounds during their occupation.
Many farmers were exposed to these pesticides when sheep dipping became a legal requirement. Their nerve damage was remarkably similar to another group of patients he saw.
Again, we examined them. They had a peculiar combination of neurological problems, in many ways similar to the problems that we actually saw in the farmers. And these turned out to be Gulf War veterans.
Veterans said they were sprayed with organophosphate pesticides, something the government denied.
They came round and sprayed the tents. It's like dense smoke. The guy comes in with this big box, like a compressor, and the stuff spewing out. And you can't see the end of your bed. It's just like being in a steam bath.
The problem was we were actually soaking the tents, the inside of the accommodation. Personnel were actually soaked with it as well. The result of this was we started seeing, obviously, insects were dying in the droves, but also the cats who were actually on the base, they were actually starting to die on the base as well.
Stocks ran low, and the necessary people were sent out to local purchase pesticides for replacement. This was found to be agricultural sheep dip.
again with all of the instructions in Arabic, and none of us knew how to use them or prepare them.
And when I press this button,
Goran Jamal found evidence of serious peripheral nerve damage in the Gulf veterans. Nerve impulses were slowed,
conduction velocity is 47.6,
and temperature sensitivity was reduced. All this was no surprise, because the organophosphate pesticides are close chemical cousins of the organophosphate nerve agents, like sarin.
In essence, the mechanism of action of the OP pesticides is identical to that of the nerve agents. Where, for example, you might require a drop of sarin to kill somebody, with the likes of malathion, one of the insecticides, you may be talking about a cupful, for example.
And their toxic effects have been known for decades.
There were a whole host of other abnormalities that we found. Once you interfere with the neurotransmitters, if no impulses pass through to the muscle, then the muscle wouldn't get their instruction. And this could explain the weakness and the tiredness that these people have. We immediately informed the Ministry of Defense, and we were told by certain officials that they would actually send us some of these veterans for investigations. This never happened, and the official line from there on was that organophosphates were not used, and we didn't believe that.
But following an inquiry, the last government did a U-turn. Defense Minister Nicholas Soames admitted he misled Parliament. Organophosphate pesticides had been sprayed in the Gulf.
I do not believe there has been a cover-up in any sense. I do believe there have been very, very, very serious and fundamental failings in one particular division within the Ministry of Defense.
The Ministry of Defense admit that many of the pesticide records have been destroyed either at the time or subsequently during routine weeding. Scientists have also voiced concerns about the fact that the Committee on Gulf War Illness turned down causative research on key issues, favoring epidemiological research instead. Independent studies to measure bone loss, immune, genetic, and nerve damage were all rejected by the government-funded committee.
We soon found that there were other consultants and professors from different departments all across the UK who had very interesting preliminary results, and they were turned down, and turned down for no reason provided at all. This is madness. This is not science.
But in the last few weeks, the government has announced a new study on nerve and muscle damage. What's more, recently it's been found that chemicals used in the Gulf can interact to produce much more toxic effects. A harmless dose of an organophosphate pesticide was combined with a harmless dose of nerve agent pretreatment, PB, and other chemicals present in the Gulf. These tiny doses were given to chickens, separately and in combination.
By applying combination of two chemicals, but by themselves are harmless, we saw increased nerve damage. And when we had three chemicals, not only we saw nerve damage and the problems with the nervous system, but also as many as 60% and 80% of the animals died. That we did not expect.
Those exposed to fewer combinations had leg weakness and tremors.
You can see the tremor a lot better when we hold the bird up like this. You know, the whole bird shakes.
Many of those exposed to all three chemicals became paralyzed.
Hands shaking her.
Look at the claws, how they become very stiff.
When they looked down the microscope, they found evidence of brain damage. This is from a healthy brain. Whereas when the animal has been exposed to three chemicals, the nerve cells have become swollen, and some fibers break down altogether. What's more, the American military knew all along that combinations of chemicals can be more toxic.
Back in the late 1960s, there was an accident that occurred at a Dugway Proving Grounds, and thousands of sheep and cattle died.
Army research showed that very low levels of nerve agents combined with certain pesticides could cause this damage.
The military has been well aware of the effects of these exposures, that very low levels, levels that don't cause serious harm, when combined with other chemical compounds at levels that don't cause serious harm are added together, they can equal death.
But a chemical explanation, however convincing, cannot account for all veterans' illness, because some got ill without going to the Gulf. And this has raised questions about the vaccination regime against biological weapons.
I think biological weapons are by far the most dangerous weapon system that is available today. The first of these is Bacillus anthracis, the causative agent of anthrax. You can ingest it and get it in your gut. You can have a cut and get cutaneous anthrax. You can see here a baby which has got cutaneous anthrax. The bacillus is in the lesion here, growing. In this case, it's in the eye socket. When anthrax is used as a biological weapon, you would spread it on the air so that people inhaled it through their lungs. And eventually you would die because you couldn't breathe. Plague comes in 3 different forms. You can have bubonic plague, you can have septicemic plague, or you can have pneumonic plague. And pneumonic plague is where it comes into the lungs. You very rapidly with plague get headaches, chills, fever. Basically you die, particularly of respiratory failure. This is a Clostridium bacterium, and this one produces botulism toxin. This is the most toxic substance that we know of for human beings. We know that Saddam Hussein had weaponized some of these agents, both in bombs and in missiles. They've been distributed to 4 different points in Iraq, and authority had been given to the generals to use these weapon systems if Baghdad was attacked with nuclear weapons.
As protection against this arsenal of bacteria, the Allies had developed several vaccines.
I was given 13 vaccines on one day. At the time, I must admit I thought it was a little bit over the top.
There was a group of medics in a horseshoe, and you took your shirt off and you went in like this and you walked through, and it was jab, 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 and polio on the tongue. And, you know, I had 14.
I had swelled so much that my skin had started to crack between my fingers, on the side of my mouth, around my eyes. It had started to peel. It was all red and very sore.
I don't have any knowledge of people being given 12 vaccines at one time. There were 3 vaccines recommended for use against biological weapons in the Gulf War by the UK. And those 3 were anthrax with pertussis as an adjuvant and plague. The idea of giving people 12 vaccines at one time, I'm not sure where that comes from. Now, there are vaccines that are given to troops when they travel to parts of the world, like the Middle East, as a matter of course to protect them against local diseases. And those were given to the troops that travel out there. But whether you get the number 12 from, and certainly the idea that they're all given at the same time, I don't believe that to be correct.
We've interviewed loads of veterans who are very much of the view that they receive between 8 and 16 vaccines all in one day, some the routine travel vaccines, some the biological vaccines. Would you dispute this?
Yes, I think I would dispute that.
But the Ministry of Defence now admit that pertussis and plague vaccines were not licensed for adults in Britain. It's also clear that they were warned not to give certain vaccines together by the Department of Health. Data showed when pertussis and anthrax were combined, there was evidence of severe loss of condition, and weight loss in animals. The faxed warning was filed at the Defense Ministry and ignored.
I think the way the vaccines were administered was also something that was bordering on the negligent. There was no long-term preparation, no time for them to build up immunity, no way of assessing whether there were any repercussions of being vaccinated against an individual agent. And to this day, many of those veterans don't know what they were vaccinated against. I think this is an enormous experiment. I don't know of any other parallel where people have been treated in this way.
We gave the best available vaccines, resulting from the best available advice at the time, and that we were in a situation where we were going to war, facing mass casualties unless we did these things in the best way that we could, given the state of knowledge at the time.
But interestingly, you're not planning to vaccinate the troops this time. Why is that?
I can't comment on anything to do with the current crisis in the Gulf.
So was it, in fact, a hollow victory? Not only may the Allies have to return, but our own defenses may have harmed our own troops.
The alarms were defective. The immunization program prior to the war was inadequate. They overused pesticides. They combined compounds. When in destroying the Iraqi chemical weapons infrastructure, the soldiers were exposed to low-level nerve agents. All of these things occurred in the military's effort to protect the soldiers. But in fact, they may have been smothering them with love. And that many of these countermeasures that the military took may in fact, and are likely, the result of the symptoms and illnesses they're suffering from today.
According to official sources, there is still no evidence for a Gulf War syndrome, or that birth defects are linked to Gulf service. 7 years on, government research is still underway to see if veterans have higher rates of illness than controls.
I think what's troubling to me about these stories with the birth defects is that we don't know where the government gets these figures from. We know other families who have children like this, and none of us have been included in these studies. So we want to know where they're getting the figures from. This whole scene is like a bad dream that I would never wish on my worst enemy. It's very frustrating, both emotionally, physically, financially. It's devastating.
Once they realized that they may have made some mistakes during the war, they switched into an adversarial mode and immediately deny everything at every step and at every turn. Say, if you're making a statement to suggest that this happened, we're not going to give you any help. We're not going to give you the documents. You have to prove it at every step of the way.
No, we've not taken an adversarial kind of stance, but we've tried to say what we don't know and not to get drawn into admitting something that we don't know is so.
But for many, this is a smokescreen in an area of research dogged with failings. Failure to monitor long-term human experiments. Failure to admit to possible nerve gas exposure. Denial of the use of pesticides. Lost chemical logs and medical records. Failure to pursue with vigor relevant independent research.
What I think is really going on here is not only Gulf War syndrome. It's really a much larger thing that I call the Pentagon syndrome. We've been experimenting on troops and forgetting or denying the evidence for decades. Back in the 40s, it was vaccines, it was nerve agents again. In the 50s, we moved into bacteriological agents. In the 60s and 70s, we moved into things like LSD. And everything about how we handled our troops exemplifies that. Now no one can find the records. We call it the missing logs. All lost. All evidence is lost. And so it's really all part of a much larger thing. It's a recurring theme that I refer to as the Pentagon syndrome.
A recent congressional committee recommended that the Department of Defense should no longer have responsibility for research into Gulf War illness. The official efforts have been irreparably flawed, plagued by arrogant incuriosity, and a myopia that sees lack of evidence as proof. The federal government has a tin ear, a cold heart, and a closed mind.
I think that reports that have criticized us for, in retrospect, not doing things as rapidly or as well as now appears we should have, are correct. I think we were slow, not because we didn't care, not because we were trying to be slow, but because it's easy to criticize in retrospect. In fact, we dealt with the information that we had and did the best we could with it. We have always tried to be as open and honest as I know how to be.
The irony of all of this is that the United States and United States companies had provided Saddam Hussein with many of the technologies that were actually used in his weapons of mass destruction program. One of the most shocking experiences that I had was actually looking at what licenses were issued for the export of these materials from a reference library for biological pathogens called the American Type Culture Collection in Rockville, Maryland, and the Centers for Disease Control. Between the two companies, we sent Saddam Hussein the pathogens responsible for anthrax, botulism, gas gangrene, and so on. The second group, the Centers for Disease Control, sent him a host of other pathogens also used in biological warfare, including the bubonic plague. These things flowed freely. In the case of overseas, they were shipped by the mail. The plague was shipped by mail or by FedEx. What's so terribly frightening about the advances in science and their applications to weaponry is that the future is unknown. In order to defend against something, we need to know what it is we're defending against. Yet there are so many different variants of a pathogen that can be created, so many different diseases that aren't diseases that we're aware of that can be created, and in secret, without us knowing what they might be. We need to have generals who understand the science, know how to use the science, and we need adequate countermeasures. We don't have any of these today.
Did you have fun today? Look over here, there's some pink birds.
I don't mind fighting for my country because I'm a soldier and that's what I accept, but for it to affect my family and my son...
What are those?
Cedric is a casualty of war and he has no idea why.
And I love you a whole bunch.
What scares me most about this whole aspect with the Gulf War syndrome is if you had a valid hypothesis for this with the chemical agents and the fallout, you would think that the government would be concerned foremost to ever prevent this from happening again. We don't see this. So what will happen to the next generation who goes after us? This is what scares me.
What this underlines to me is that there really isn't protection against chemical warfare or biological warfare, at least protection sufficient for what we require. The countermeasures that have been used and administered to soldiers in the Gulf have created problems in their own right. If you think of the planet that we inhabit, it seems vast. But when you're talking about deliberate release of diseases, there really isn't any frontier that diseases respect. They will cross all frontiers. And our means of communication are so rapid and the movement of people is so rapid that I think it's really very difficult to keep all of these things within bounds. And the thought that somebody would deliberately release a disease is beyond me, but I think it's something that you have to consider could happen.
The soldiers need to understand that this is a serious threat on the battlefield, equally or more serious than any bullet, than any tank, than any plane. It is the future of war.
These men have seen the top of the world.
When you step on it, it's like walking on a waterbed.
Have endured temperatures of -50.
The sledges that they were using, they were more like mahogany bedsteads.
Suffered physical hardships.
To his annoyance, he found that 8 of his toes were frozen solid.
They removed 600 tons of ice with a little knife, some spades, and a little axe.
A few have come back to glory. Others have come back to fierce controversy. Some have never come back at all.
Andre and Franke were almost separated into different parts, so probably the polar bears had been chewing some of it.
A major new series, Icemen, looks at how the North Pole has lured the daring and brave. Icemen, next Thursday at 9:30 on BBC Two.
Now on BBC Two, one Bristol 400, several careful owners.
Did you hear that mockingbird sing last night? Honey, he was singing so sweet in the moonlight, in that old magnolia tree, busting his heart with melody.
Everything I have done has been through chance. Everything I've planned in my life has never worked out. So I've been on the stage.
I'd lay right down and die and die.
I took up boxing, had about 12 fights, and every one was finished in the first round.
Despite such diversions, Brian May has in fact spent most of his adult life pursuing one main interest: buying, restoring and selling Bristol motor cars.
Before I got involved with Bristol, I had a number of cars, most of which you could drive flat out for a good proportion of the time and not break the speed limit. Then a friend of mine came and said, are you interested in a Bristol? I said, Bristol? What's a Bristol? Well, he said, my boss has got a Bristol made by the Bristol Aeroplane Company. It's all aluminium and it does 100 miles an hour. I said, yes, yes. I do like craftsmanship wherever it is, whether it's in bricklaying, carpentry or mechanics, and there's a lot of craftsmanship that went into Bristol cars because, I mean, they use aircraft engineers. So there's design quality as well, and it's a very, very usable car. It has a certain amount of testosterone and estrogen, I think, and you can experience that if you rub your hands over the car. You'll know what I mean. The first time I saw this car was back in 1969 when I brought it from Frank Butler. He was a local Bristol owner living in Solihull. He used it as his everyday car and also for racing and sprinting and that sort of thing. I bought it from him, I remember, for £150. And for some unknown reason, I had it sprayed a bright kingfisher yellow. Why? In the midst of time, I cannot imagine. However, it did attract the attention of the next purchaser, which was a young medical student at the time, Richard Latcham.
I lived on a narrowboat just down there, and we used to stagger up in the morning, my friend Nick and I, and a bit late for lectures. I remember the guy on the boat next door. He always used to come in and say, "I'm sorry I'm late, my boat sank again." I wanted a car, and the ones that I noticed were beautiful always seemed to be Bristols.
He made an appointment to come and see the car, and I remember he came with his mother. He looked round the car, and I can remember it to this day. His mother said, "Richard, darling, don't you think you should buy a Morris Minor first? And you can always go on to a Bristol later on." And I can remember sort of crossing my fingers thinking, what sensible advice, I hope he doesn't take it. And he didn't.
Brian was quite, to me, was quite a formidable character then. And I remember timidly saying, "Oh, I think I'd like to get the AA to come along and see if it's all right. And I've never forgotten Brian said, well, if you want to get the AA, you can't have it.
We developed a very strong friendship which has lasted to this day, and Richard is one of my best friends. And during that time he came and gave me a hand doing some of the repair work here.
Do you know what you're doing there?
Yes, I do.
Brian used to, well, supposedly help me do things. Usually when I asked him how to do something, he would say, oh, I don't know really, and just watch while I found out how to do it, actually. And I remember asking Brian, what's the money like? And he said, small and brown.
The car briefly returns to Brian in the late 70s, before being sold on to ex-rugby international Peter Bell.
A great drive by England, trying to give England retreating possession, Wales retreating possession. That's Bell diving for it, number 6. And Morris was almost over on the blind side.
Bristol cars, they're sort of a bit of an emotional thing, really. I mean, they sort of get into your blood, and once you've had one, you seem to collect them over the years. I had an old Bristol 405 saloon. In fact, my girlfriend at the time wrote it off. It's certainly altered a lot since I had it. It was green in those days.